28th of March 1995. Mick, when were you born?
26th of September 1926.
And were you born at where?
Across the road. Crown Street Hospital, then we were living across the road.
Oh, right. Right. So you weren't born at home?
No.
No. Did you have brothers and sisters?
Two sisters. Both older than I am. One by 7 years and the other by 5.
Oh. And, well, what are your earliest memories of Beaconsfield?
Children, playing with children, dozens of them.
Yeah.
So there was children all over the street and all over the next street, up Queen Street. Marbles, playing marbles, football out there in the street.
Was it safe then to play in the streets?
Yes, because there wasn't many motor vehicles. A lot of lorries, a lot of horse-drawn lorries and carts and things like that. There were cars, but not many. If we were playing cricket, we'd grab the wicket and run off the road and then bring it back.
So when do your earliest memories go back to? What years would you be talking about there where you remember the marbles and...
Goodness. I remember going to the kindergarten up here on the corner of Collins Street and Queen Street. It was the Bluebird Kindergarten. Now that was preschool, and I mean, and it was there was a lot of children going to that place.
Do you know who ran that kindergarten?
Yeah, the Kindergarten Union. I found that out later in life, but it was the Kindergarten Union. They set up quite a lot of kindergartens. Did people have to pay fees, or were they... Well, at that time, people didn't have money.
Yeah.
And I think that the parents would reciprocate by helping with the lunches and cleaning the kindergarten and seeing everything was all right. There may have been a small fee, but I don't remember it, and I certainly don't believe that there was one. I think the councils used to help them, the local municipal councils. I could be wrong, but I think that's the way it is.
Yeah, because at that time there wasn't much money around.
Very, very little.
Well, what kind of a house did you live in?
Here it is.
Oh, so you're living in the same... You came to this house when you were...
2 years of age, or 18 months of age.
And it stayed in the family all that time?
All the time.
Oh, gosh. So this is a single-storey terrace semi, isn't it?
Yes, it is a terrace. People on both sides.
Oh, right.
Common walls on both sides.
And how many bedrooms does it?
2.
And your family, there were only 3 children?
3 children.
Well, what kind of a place was Beaconsfield for kids in, say, the early 30s?
Poor, but very happy. They were all happy, the kids. They certainly didn't have much money, but they found things to do. As I say, the football we played for. I played football for many years with a local team, junior football, the Carringtons. And they're still playing in the South Sydney Junior competition. Just down the street was a man named Teddy Green, and he'd been an Australian champion boxer, friend of my family for many, many years. And at a very young age, I think it was 4, he took me to a little gymnasium he had in Queen Street. That had been a Catholic church, and there was an upper part and a lower part. It was built on a hill, and there was a top part that we used to use. The people, well, I didn't, but the people that lived in the area used it as a dance hall. On a Saturday night, it was a get-together locally. I mean, everybody used to go there to a dance. I remember I went there and learned to dance with my mother and sisters. That type of thing. But underneath he had the gymnasium, and I spent a lot of time there. And that was I was only very young, 4 years of age, 5 years of age, no more than 5 when I first went there with him. Yeah.
Well, what kind of a kid were you?
An average kid around the Redfern, Alexandria way. Always in trouble of some description, but not serious trouble, you know. But no, it was more sport. They were sports minded, you know. I mean, as I say, they'd get a football and kick it around the street, or they'd have a cricket bat and the ball and they'd be playing out the street. Or where the Beaconsfield Park is now, there used to just be a flat level of a paddock type of thing that they'd play up there. But mostly it was in the street out the front.
Okay. Well, look, talking about your family, well, what sort of a family do you come from?
Well, two very kind parents, loving parents, very loving. My father has never hit one of us in his life. Didn't have to. We respected him, and he often he wouldn't be. Most times he wasn't stern. He was a very dry-witted man, and he gained the respect. Well, he gained the respect of everybody in this area, but he'd certainly gained the respect of his children, without violence of any description. And my mother was, all she wanted to do was hold you and hug you, but all the time they were worried. There was no money. Very difficult, very difficult. He was the mayor of this area on 3 occasions, and he couldn't get work himself.
Really?
He was, originally, his father lived had a big building in Botany Road in Beaconsfield, down here a little, and they had horses and carts and drays and that type of thing. And my father in his earlier life was a brick carter. He'd cart bricks from the brickworks, which was only up here in Waterloo, to places like Maroubra that were being built and all that, and 2 or 3 loads, and earning fairly good money. But when the Depression came, the building stopped and he just could not get work. I think he was out of work for over 5 years and couldn't get work. And my mother, to help, our neighbour here was getting on in years then. He was much older than them, but he had 2 motor lorries that he parked in there as well. It's a double place. And he used to give my mother money to do his washing and his ironing and clean his house up and that sort of thing. And that type of way they would get through. My father would earn whatever he could, but I mean there was no work. I remember at one stage he was working on the tramways, the tram lines here on Botany Road. I remember that very clearly. But it wasn't for long. They put them off after a couple of weeks and put somebody else on, and then they'd rotate. There was that much unemployment that where there was one job, there'd be 30 or 40 people waiting for that job. You know, that was the type of thing he did. I remember, I can't remember the dates. I certainly can't remember the dates, but it was either 1934, and I'm sure it was 1934, it was either 1934 or 1938 where he was the mayor of Alexandria, and he and another friend of his, Reg Cope, who was the mayor of Redfern, through the councils that they represented, went to see Bill McKell, who was he wasn't the Premier, I don't think, he was the Minister for Road Transport or Main Roads or something like that. And they approached him to get money to asphalt O'Riordan Street that was at that time just dust and dirt and curb and gutter. And he agreed, and he gave them the money because he was in the Labor Party as well. He agreed and gave them the money, and they went ahead and put a lot of men on to do the job. But my father couldn't work on it because he was a representative of the council, so he couldn't get a job there. But many of the people around here did. So it was tough.
Yeah.
It was tough.
And how, I mean, you said that your mother did a bit of cleaning or whatever.
Yeah.
And, well, what when there was no money?
Well, what it was is that they gave you a dole, and the dole comprised. Now remember, I don't remember this. I can vaguely remember the finish of it, but what it comprised, I understand from my mother and my father, was that it was flour, sugar, syrup, tea, not milk, and things like that type of thing. Now to get it, to collect it, you had to go to, I think it was Redfern or even Central, that you had to somehow or other get down and get it. Now my father had a twin brother, and they were very close, and they decided, because of the poor devils around here, somehow or other had to get down to Central or wherever. So they decided between the two of them that they, through a Labor Party that they had formed here in 1923, that they would go and get it and bring it back and dole it out in to the people here. Anyhow, the government or whoever agreed that they could do it that way, providing they got the dole slips. And that's how it was. But things were so cheap too, sir. I mean, I think a rabbit was threepence. Watermelons, they'd almost give them to you. And my mother insisted on that we eat fruit. That, you know, no matter what, fruit had to be there. And there was a man just up the street who was a friend of ours, and his children used to play with me. He was a fruiter. He had the wagon with fruit and vegetables and that on, and he'd always see that everybody along the street got it as cheap as he possibly could, you know. So somehow or other they survived. I don't know how. I don't know how. And I remember one fella telling me that for threepence you could get in the tram here, go down to Circular Quay, have a schooner of beer and a lunch, get the tram back for threepence.
Sounds a bit far-fetched.
Well, I don't think so. In those times, I don't think so, because the hotels couldn't do anything. You know, he could have been wrong, but I distinctly remember him telling me that. Whether that's, I don't know whether it was a penny in the tram, but the meal in the hotel was for nothing. It was a counter lunch, as they called it. But how much the schooner actually cost? But he said for threepence. And I know we used to get into the local theatre for threepence as a kid. But it was hard, but I didn't feel it nearly as much as the adults would have felt it.
Can you remember being hungry?
No, I can't. I can't. Yet I know that there were times when there was very little to eat, but there was always fruit. And I would take an orange and run out and play with it, or whatever, you know, but you had to be here for your meals. Whatever the meal was, you had to be here for it. But I never felt hunger as a desire, you know. But no, they were good parents, and I don't know how they did it. I wish they were here to tell you how they did it. But it was done.
What about other kids? Did you notice malnutrition or any signs of hunger amongst any of the other kids in the neighbourhood?
Well, I remember this, that I went to Waterloo School and then on to Gardeners Road School. Gardeners Road was a secondary school. 6th class, you left Waterloo and went to Cleveland Street or Gardeners Road or wherever. But I do remember this, that we used to look with envy at a child sitting there at lunch eating a sergeant's pie. And I do remember some kids would eat half an apple and then throw the other half to one of his mates. That's how, you know, the kids themselves realised that it was tough. that their father was in a better position. You know, and that type of thing.
And were the people that were unemployed, were they condemned as dole bludgers and that kind of thing?
No, because there were so many of them. Even today, are they condemning people for being dole bludgers? It's gone. It's because there are too many. Too many have been through it, sir, to be calling them that.
Yeah.
They weren't like that in those days. They take any work. Any work. So that's what I can remember.
Okay. In your family, who controlled the finances?
What finances?
Well, presumably after, say in the later 30s when your dad did get some money, or did get work.
Yeah, my mother did. My mother did. He used to bring, I remember early in the war he was selling, the federal government employed him as selling victory bonds, and he'd have to go to various factories and make speeches and encourage them to invest in the war effort by purchasing a victory bond for £5 or £10 or something like that. He'd bring the money home and she would look after it, and whatever he wanted he'd tell her.
Oh, right, that's his wage packet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've done that all my, to the 2 marriages I've been in.
That sounds like a good system.
Well, the woman's there, she's got to handle it, hasn't she? I mean, she's got to have the money to live on.
So your mother did all the budgeting and...
Yeah, well, she was the only one that would know how to budget for 3 children, and for him as well, because he wasn't here. He was out doing whatever he could to get the money to be here. Yeah.
Were your parents religious?
My mother was active in this little Church of England church up here. Every Sunday she would go to church. Yeah. He wasn't so religious. No, he would listen to what she would try and convince him of, and he'd take it in. But he believed in God, yes, certainly. But he doubted sometime if there was one, with what he's seen around him, you know. But they were both, what's the word I'm looking for? They were both so sympathetic to what was happening around them, with the people that was happening to. And I think that's what made him go into politics. And it's what made the people around here form the Australian Labor Party. I think that happened in 1923, that was before Depression. But he started that with a man named Tom O'Connor. And they started the branch here, and everybody turned to, or the great majority of the people here, turned to the ALP when this trouble was on. Because there was nobody else to turn to. And they helped in every way that was possible. As I said, that little dance up there on a Saturday night, everybody would take a sandwich or something, and the men would bring some beer and some lemonade for the women, and that was their night out. And it affected both of them very, very, it went deep inside them, you could feel it, you know.
What did, sorry?
The lack of money.
Oh, yeah.
The way people were suffering.
Were those dances run by the ALP?
Yes.
Oh, so it would be a fundraiser?
No, I don't think there was any charge.
Oh.
I don't think there was any charge to go. People didn't have the money. But what they would do is take up sandwiches and coffee and tea, and I think, if I remember correctly, there was an urn up there that they could make the tea with. And
it's funny, you said coffee then, but people didn't... Did there people drinking coffee at that time?
we've always drank coffee.
Oh.
Always. And tea. My mother was a great tea drinker. But he'd drink tea or coffee, my father.
Was that stuff in bottles, in essence?
You could buy that. But no, they had the coffee grounds, you know.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, I think that was as cheap as tea. I could be wrong, but I think that was as cheap as tea to use. But my mother was of French descent. He was a dead set Australian, but she was of French descent, and I think she told me when she was a small girl she used to have to drink wine at the meal with her father, because that was what the French meant. But there was no, she'd like a cup of tea, but she'd equally have a cup of coffee. To tell you the truth, Sue, I haven't had a cup of tea. I did have one with Teddy McDermott about 6 months ago. I haven't had a cup of tea in 20 or 30 years. I'm a water drinker. I like a beer, but I don't go chasing beer, looking for it. But if you ask me, would I have a cup of tea, I'd say, have you got a cup of coffee? If I had to have one or the other.
Notice at that time it was quite unusual to hear people talking about coffee.
Well, it may be in their home, because remember, with the dole, you got tea. You didn't get coffee. How she got the money for coffee, I don't know.
Yeah.
Or whether she drank it, well, whether we drank it at that time, I don't know. I can't remember that.
Well, getting back to the political involvement of your family, the next question, were they politically involved? And quite obviously, your father was mayor.
Yeah, they were politically involved. Mum was the mayoress, 2 or 3 occasions for my father, and on another occasion one of the aldermen had been elected mayor, and he was a bachelor. So he asked her would she do it for him for that 12 months, and she said yes. So she had more mayoresses than he had mayoralties. Yeah. So and I think that the mayor, not the aldermen weren't paid any money. There was no money involved in that. But the mayor got, I think it was £3. I could be wrong. It could have been 3 shillings. I don't know. But I think I got it in the back of my mind. It was £3 they got for a month or something for entertainment. And she used to make sandwiches here, and then a council vehicle would pick it up and take it to Alexandria Town Hall for the aldermen after they had their meeting. Then there'd be a tea or whatever over there for them as well. But that was, what would you call it, entertainment allowance.
Right.
But she used to make the sandwiches here.
Were your parents, did they talk about politics a lot?
All the time.
What can you remember of their views?
Well, the view was that was unbelievably sad for what was happening to the ordinary people that lived around them.
Can you remember the sacking of Lang?
I know Lang. I knew Lang.
Oh, really?
My father and Lang were friends. In later years I started a local newspaper, and Lang would advise me occasionally as to what to do, not what to do, but how to word what I was doing. I remember in...
Well, what was the paper called?
South Sydney Observer. It lasted about 5 or 6 years. It was a fad, but it had done well. And then in the Whitlam years, a lot of newspapers, suburban newspapers, relied for their bread and butter, the printing, etc., on positions vacant. And I had one man who approached me to allow him to sell the positions vacant, to put it into the paper. He had played rugby league for Australia. I won't mention his name, if that's all right, because he may not want me to. He had played rugby league for Australia, and a very sensible man. He said, Mick, would you close the paper up if I told you to, when the time came, if I told you to? He said, if there was no future in the positions vacant. And I had a lot of trust in him. I said, yes, I would, because that was the bread and butter. That's what kept it going. And after about 5 years, he said, mate, for your own sake, it's reached the end of its tether. And he said, now don't be foolish like some of them will be, and they'll go broke. You get out with the few bob that you've got. So I ran it for another month or two, and I could see that he was absolutely right.
When was that? When did you have the paper?
1971 to well, when Whitlam went out. I think it was 1975 on it, something like that. And he was absolutely right. There was a mini depression or a recession.
Yeah. Well, getting back to Lang, what can you tell me about Lang? What was he like?
Well, everybody around here thought he was the best thing since sliced bread. When I was a small boy, I'd been down to the Domain and heard Lang speak on many, many occasions. And it still sticks in my mind, the desire to help the people of New South Wales.
Was he a good orator?
Oh, marvellous. Marvellous. And then there were many others. I remember another bloke, Jack Beasley. It was almost as good, a Labor man. Yeah, he was a very good orator.
And what was Lang's reaction when, he was dismissed from government?
Well, I think Lang's trouble was that he could not get on with the New South Wales Labor Party machine. I think that was Lang's trouble. And when he got out, he formed the Lang Labor Party. And this branch that I told you started in 1923 in this area, all went to Lang. And so did most of the local Labor parties in this area. But he was big enough, a couple of years later, to come back and say, there's no sense in staying with me, you go back to the Labor Party. So they did.
Right.
And they didn't do it a sheep-like. They understood what he was saying, that they were to help the people in New South Wales. There was no way that Lang could further help them. And that the only way that these great number of people that were in the ALP, call them what you will, ordinary members of Parliament, ordinary members of the ALP, sleepers that nobody knew about, that in this branch alone at one stage there was over 280 members, which was a third of the population of the area, including children and all. And I don't mean the children were in at the moment, but I mean, if you take the population of the area, 280 of those were in that ALP.
Well, what other politicians can you remember?
Chifley and my father were friends. I only met Chifley on 2 or 3 occasions. Very strongly opposed to Lang, and Lang very strongly opposed to Chifley. But a good man, Ben Chifley.
How did your father manage those friendships with the two of
Well,
us?
they were members. They were members of the Australian Labor Party. They were there to help the people. Not what is happening today, if I could put it that way. Although fundamentally, I think the Labor Party still wants to help as much as it possibly can the people. As my father has said, and as Lang has said, the worst Labor Party, the worst Labor government in the world is 10 times better than the best Liberal Party in the world. So, it's still the Labor Party. It still is the Labor Party. And I don't say that blindly. I mean, I've been around this world a few times since those days, and I've seen the system in Australia. I've seen it in Japan, and in all those Asian countries, and looked at the English type of thing. You won't find a more democratic system than what Australia has got, even though it is only a two-party system, really.
Yeah.
But look at this recent election. Look at the number of people that are now in that are independent, that have got in by having 2.5% or 4% of people voting for them. And some of them are donkey votes. They didn't know. I seen one little Aboriginal girl up here at the polling booth on Saturday. She was just staring around the room with this long sheet of paper in her hand. And she looked at me, she said, "What'll I do?" I said, "Put one on the Y vote." "Oh, thanks." She was completely lost. I was. I'd laid a good look at it.
Okay, now let's get back to the 1930s and when you were a kid. What sort of discipline was used in the house? You said your father never ever hit you.
Never.
So what happens if you were being a bit of a ratbat?
Well, to give you an example, Steve, I come out of the Air Force after the war finished, and I walked in one day, and behind that door there at the back, there was only my mum and I here. Behind the door at the back there was a leather strap that had grooves cut in the bottom. I said, "Don't tell me you've still got this thing." She said, "I could never catch you." Now, if you'd get the slightest tap while you were running, she said I had to have something to try and discipline this with.
So your mum did the disciplining?
Yes.
With this leather strap, but she never really got
She
you.
waved it.
So it was more the threat.
It was only a threat, and that's what she said. She said, "But you were always too fast for me."
Were you expected to contribute towards the family in any way? Say when you got up to be about 8 or 10 years old.
No.
Didn't you have to sell papers or collect bottles?
No. But what I did do, sir, was that up on the where the we're right.
Yes.
Where the Beaconsfield Park is now, behind there, many years ago, there used to be a glass factory. Then they moved the factory from that position to another position further down. And one of the kids around here got the bright idea that he'd gather up the glass. And it was big pieces of glass, not like a broken bottle, but they were...
Molten?
Yes, pieces of molten glass. He took it back to the factory and sold it. So when all the kids around here heard that, everybody was up selling molten glass, or the old glass, back to the factory. That was one example. But no, my mother always said to me, "Look, make something of yourself. Study. Learn. It's the only way out of this." So there was no desire. Although I left the secondary school, not because she wanted me to, she wanted me to go on and on and on. But I left because I wanted to leave school. I'd reached what they call the end of the second year, the year before the intermediate. I regretted it later, because I had to do a lot of hard work in the air. I was in the aircrew, and you had to do a lot of hard work to get through those examinations, to get what you wanted to be, without that extra knowledge, that 1 year's extra knowledge. But I left, I was 13 years and 10 months or something like that when I left school, and I got a job.
What did you get a job doing?
At the sports master at Gardeners Road School got me the job. They made welding electrodes. In other words, they cut wire and covered it with a film of something, and they chopped it up, and we were wrapping them and all of that type of thing. But later on I went to a place called Alder Stroud, which was down in Alexandria, and I became apprentice to a sheet metal worker. But I was only there a short time, and I wasn't, I'll tell you the truth, I wasn't 17 years of age, and I enlisted in the aircrew.
The Air Force?
Yeah, the pilot, navigator, air gunner business. And wasn't there bedlam in this house over that?
Yeah, what was the reaction to that?
Terrible. It was the only argument that my mother and father and I really had. They said, "You're going to be killed."
Could you actually choose when you signed up for the war, like you wanted to be in
No, because I was underage, and I had to falsify my age. It was I was in what they call a protected industry, that you could not enlist. Say I become 18 and I was still working there. I could not then enlist because I was in a protected industry making war parts. So I'd read where the records in Folkestone in Kent had been bombed and there was no records of births, deaths or marriages. It was all gone. The post office had gone. So I cheated.
That wouldn't be our records that went in England.
No, I said I was born there.
Oh, you told him you were a pom?
So, and the recruiting sergeant told me I was the blackest pom he ever seen. Because I was burnt swimming, I was as black as could be. He said, however, that doesn't worry us as long as you can pass this physical and written examination, that's all we want. But I was that was the only service that you could break away, that they would take you out of a protected industry.
If you went into the Air Force?
If you enlisted in aircrew.
In aircrew, because that was really dangerous.
Oh, it wasn't about dangerous, it was what they wanted.
Oh. So what position, what were you, a pilot?
I was doing pilot training when the war eventually finished. So I was 18 months and still not.
You'd been in for 18 months?
At least 18 months and still had not seen action.
So you were lucky?
Well, I was lucky, but it did cause a lot of trouble here.
They could have gone and told them that you were lying and underage and all that.
They could have done all that.
But they didn't.
I had to convince them of it, not to do it. And all they were worried about was death.
Yeah, I'm surprised you were able to convince them. You would have had trouble convincing me.
Well, what I told them was that if they didn't agree to it, I'd run away. So, but that did cause a lot of upset, a lot of heartache.
Yes, yes.
So at least once a week I wrote to them and let them know how I was going.
Okay, well what did your family do for fun? You've mentioned the dances at the hall. I assume that all the families go, not just the mum and dad and the team?
No, all the five of us went there.
So, and everybody else took their families
Of course, yeah.
And what did you do for music actually at these dances?
Well, they'd have somebody that could play a piano and somebody else that would have a accordion, and that'd be it.
Okay, well what else did you do for fun?
Well, as I told you, the football.
No, the family. Did the family
yeah.
together?
Well, again, a lot of it to do, again, because the ALP, they'd go on horse and carts to picnics. There was always some activity. I'm not trying to make too big a deal of the ALP. I'm not trying to do that. But it was, at that time, the sort of centre or the hub of which they all gathered around, you know.
So where would they go for picnics?
Yarra Bay, San Susie. Yarra Bay wasn't a bad place then. And I still go out there occasionally and swim. I'll jump in the car and go out and have a swim. And they've cleaned it up, and it's, when I used to swim there, going back 10 years, there was no sort of marine life there. But now, there's little fish, there's little crabs about, prawns.
And they were there in the 30s as well?
Oh yes, people used to live out there in tin sheds. They'd been evicted from their homes. They called it Happy Valley. And they'd get some galvanised iron and make a sort of a lean-to. And families, not only single men, but families.
You can remember that?
I remember them being there, yes, because my father's mother died in 1933, I think it was. And we used to go of a weekend once a fortnight or so, my grandfather and my father and his twin brother, and his son, my twin brother's, my uncle's son, and we were very close friends. We were very much the same age. And we'd go out to the Botany Cemetery. Now they'd leave us at the beach, and they would go into the grave, and then they'd come back and maybe have a swim themselves. And then we'd come home in the horse and cart.
Do you remember people being evicted from here and say ending up at Yarra Bay at Happy Valley?
I can't remember individual people, no, but I know there was a lot from Redfern, and I would imagine from this area that finished up in that position.
Can Can you remember the unemployed workers movement? I mean, that was a Communist Party sort of initiative.
Only what I've seen on the TV recently.
Oh, right.
Yeah. But I do remember the, what was it, the Workers of the World or something?
Wobblies.
I remember them mentioned. Yeah, mentioned. And I mean, at that time, I remember it quite well.
Was the local ALP working together with the unemployed workers movement?
I don't know, and I don't believe so. I don't know.
They were helping a lot of people with the evictions and trying to get a moratorium on convictions.
Well, for all I know, Sue, it may have even been part of the ALP tied up together, but I can't remember that part.
Well, in the evening, what did your family typically do in the evening?
Well, my mother had 8 siblings. There was 9 of them, 9 children, all lived in this street.
Gosh.
My father had 5 who all lived nearby. This place was always full. They'd always be coming to him for advice or wanting something. I don't mean that in a detrimental way. This was the place that they looked to.
So you'd have lots of kids around here as well?
All the time. There was kids, that street was full of kids. Up till about 8:30 in the evening. But,
were you free to go to your relative's house and drop in and see your cousins? And
of course, yes. But providing I'd say to my mum, I'm going down to see Billy or something like that. And she'd say, all right, well now you know your tea's going to be ready at 5:30 or something like that. Then if I wasn't back, she'd come and get me out of Billy's or wherever,
So in the evening there'd always be people here and the kids would be playing in the street and...
Yeah, that was it.
Can you describe your mother's working day?
No, I can't, except I'd say to be non-stop.
Who worked harder, your mother or your dad?
Well, I think my mother worked a lot harder in the house, but he worked a lot harder helping people.
How did the Depression affect your parents? I mean, they'd already helped set up the Labor Party in 1923. And really there was a lot of unemployment all the way through the 20s anyway. It just got worse.
Yeah, it got terrible in 1929 and 30 and that, yeah.
What was the long term, did it have any effect on their health or what about even, some people were embittered by the experience, some people were radicalised by the experience.
Yeah, well,
what
I think the main thing was that they were sad. They'd see, like my mother, they'd have arguments about that. My mother would go outside and there'd be a fellow walking along the street and he'd be drunk. And she knew him, naturally. So she'd walk him home and see that everything was all right with him and his wife. Like that there was, that it was his lead in, she'd lead him in. Then she'd come home and my father would go, look, what are you doing that for? When they're drunk, this is likely to happen. Why didn't you call out to me and I'd have walked him home? But she'd done it. It was all done by that time. It was over with. But that was their main feeling, I think, the sorrow that it had to happen, and it was happening. And what was the answer to it?
Did they think that it had to happen?
No. They believed that it should never have happened.
And who was responsible for it?
Well, again, big business. The Christopher Skases of this world, and without going any further than that, there are plenty more. But and that the people were not getting a fair go. Because if you've seen, I've seen men when I was a little boy. They'd have a horse and cart tied up and working at 4 o'clock in the morning. It wasn't right that they shouldn't be earning a living. My father, when he did work, they worked as what they called as navvies, with picks and shovel, digging up roads. That, it was hard work, and there was no let up on it. There was no let up. But down here at Bradford and Kendall's, which was a huge foundry, Later on in years, I became very close to a man that I used to train in a gymnasium that he owned, and he explained, he was a little older than me, and he fought for an Australian championship too. And he explained to me that when he was a young man, he'd come from Balmain over to Bradford Kendall's, and there might be 500 men standing outside that door. They wanted 5 or 6. And they talked to them as if they were dogs. And they put you on one day. And you would have to line up again the next day.
It's awful, isn't it?
Terrible. Terrible. But that's it.
Okay. Well, getting a bit more practical. What was a typical meal in your household at that time?
Well, I think of a breakfast we'd have porridge or whatever that type of cereal was, and I can't remember really. And then there'd be toast and maybe jam or whatever, syrup or whatever the dole people happen to give them at that particular week. Lunch, it'd always be a sandwich of some description. The dinner would always be the meal. She was a good cook, very good cook. And I don't know how she did it. When I think of it now.
And what would you have?
Well, maybe you'd have soup, maybe a casserole of some sort. Stew. She used to make and a mother, because the mother was French, she'd get, it was delightful, a rabbit, and somehow or other do it in tomato soup, and a little curry as well, with rice. And, it was a beautiful meal. It really was a beautiful meal. But somehow or other she'd match up. And like the fish and chips, that was always on once a week. She made a very good meat pie, a really good meat pie, you know. And
would you usually have dessert as well?
No, there'd be no money but fruit. Fruit. She made sure there was fruit, fresh fruit.
And was it the same sort of, what kind of variety was there of fruit and veg at that?
Beautiful.
But was it mostly seasonal? Like now, you know,
yeah. I mean, you get oranges that big. Beautiful oranges. Apples.
But would you get them all year round or just at some time?
No, the same as it is now today. You see, I still love fruit. In that fridge I've got about a dozen peaches, and they're just about finished. And they're about that ring. But the peaches, we used to get a bit like that. The tomatoes are completely different. I don't know what they do with tomatoes today. I have no idea. But, you know, I mean, the fruit was your dessert.
Right. So in the Depression, I mean, a lot of people did get sick, and a lot of kids died from childhood diseases that they just probably wouldn't have died of if they'd had a decent nutrition base, you know. I mean, did you remain healthy across those years?
Well, yes. And not only what they fed me, but as I say, I trained in a gymnasium. I've always done that. I still do it today, not in the gymnasium here. I still do it. So that's always stuck to me.
Did you have to pay to go to the gymnasium?
No.
Well, how did the guy make the living?
He didn't.
Oh.
He didn't want to. He had been a
Who was he?
Teddy Green.
Oh, right.
He held a championship, and his brother Jackie Green. They're no relation, or to my knowledge, no relation. Jackie always said that he was, to me, always. But Jackie was a man and I was a baby. And Jackie held 3 Australian championships at the one time. And he fought a world champion. And Jack used to earn £400 a fight in those days. And yet Jack found himself working on the pick and shovel with my father around the road here. Now what Jack did with his money, I got no idea. He certainly didn't have it in his years afterwards. So what he did, I think a lot went to his wife, they divorced, He lost a little boy under tree was struck by lightning, and the boy was under the tree and crushed him at Burralee Park at Botany. But that's what stuck to me, as well as the food that my mother gave me.
What sort of things did they have at a gym in those days?
Certainly not all of the razzmatazz you see today. There'd be 3 or 4 different types of punching bags. We've got a little place up here. Teddy's the chairman of it, the Neighbourhood Watch. Now I promised them, because I didn't know how the kids would go, I promised them that I would teach them how to box for 8 weeks. And they spent about $1,000 on the equipment that's up there. Not a lot of equipment. So I did for 8 weeks. And some of them were there, didn't want to do it. So I just said to Ted, that's it. But I know he's angling to get me back, and I probably will go back when the kids learn what they've got to do. But they expect to go in a gymnasium and start pulling weights up and down and getting onto a rowing machine. That's all unnecessary. Not necessary at all. But to keep yourself in good condition. And we were in good condition.
And so you had punching bags?
Yeah, skipping ropes, but the main thing is the exercises, which requires nothing. Only you and your body. That's all that's required. And the will to do it. And feel so much better for it after. You know.
Yeah.
But at 45, I was training at this particular friend's place over in Rosebery for years and years. But what we would do was go and train and sweat, and then go to the Rosebery Hotel and fill up again, which was ridiculous, but it was our enjoyment.
Okay, well, when you were a kid, who were your friends?
Oh, you want me to name them?
Yep.
Well, next door but one, on that side, there was 3 boys around my age. Bevans, their name were. Teddy Green had a son, which is only just a little bit further down. Across the road were about 5 children of the King family. Just a little bit back this way was about 4 children of the Smith family, all boys. Their name was Smith. He was an Australian soldier in the First World War that married an English woman and brought her back in. Just up the road was Preddy's, the fellow that I told you had the horse and cart with the fruit and the vegetables. Oh, God, there was any amount of it. And there are only some that I can think of after going back 63 or 64 years ago.
You've mentioned marbles and cricket and football. I mean, what else did you do with your friends?
Got into trouble often.
Yeah? Tell us about some of the things you got into trouble with.
Well, scaling on trams was one thing. The tram would be going past and you'd jump on it while it was going, and then the conductor would start chasing you and you'd jump off, and all of that silly nonsense.
And did you just do it to annoy the conductors, or
no, it was
to go somewhere?
It was peer pressure.
Oh, right. So it was competition?
Of course.
Oh. So it wasn't like you were actually going anywhere, this was just one of the activities that were...
Yeah. I've seen one boy, I don't know how he could ever do it, I could never do it, but 2 trams would pass one another, and they're only that far apart. He'd go scaling the tram, he'd go off one onto the other, going out opposite direction. Now how he could possibly do it, I don't know.
Gee.
But there was a boys' brigade up in this little church.
What's that?
It was a bit similar to the Scouts, but it was a Church of England type thing. And it was very strong in those particular years because they realised the trouble that people were in with depression and it. And apparently the Church of England formed this thing and it became the Boys' Brigade. And I remember the man that ran it, and I can still remember his name. His name was Mr. Richards. And he'd chase us up to go to this place. And he'd come down and say to my mother or father, Mick didn't turn up tonight. So Mick would get into trouble for not turning up that night up the thing. But
and where would you have been?
God. Somebody's house. Somebody that I thought was interesting than the Boys' Brigade, you know. But they'd teach you how to tie knots and camp, and not to go camping, but what you do camping.
If you theoretically went.
If you went, yes.
And they never ever took kids, you think?
They didn't take them anywhere, I don't think. Or I certainly can't recall that they took it anywhere.
Okay, well, what else? Aside from the scaling the trams, or what other things? You know, you must have had some adventures.
Plenty of adventures. As we got more grown up a little, and I still mean in the 12 and 13 year age group, we were playing junior football. Say we were playing a team on the Saturday, we go there on the Friday and fight them before we played them on the Saturday. So they know what they were going to run into on the Saturday. And all of that type of thing. But I mean, there was, say, 20 kids. And which was silly, but I mean, that was what went on.
Was there much inter-suburb rivalry? Like, you know, I've heard things about, it's sort of funny, people in the suburb next door always think, like the people in King's Cross or Point think, oh, you don't go down to Woolloomooloo, you know, the Woolloomooloo mob or whatever. Was there that kind of thing around here?
No, it was more in football teams, which was representative of the little areas like Kensington football, all in the South Sydney Junior Football Club, which was Kensington, Mascot, Botany, Alexandria, no, they weren't in the competition, Zetland, Redfern All Blacks, teams like that maybe 30 or 40 teams, and the rivalry was there on the football field.
Right, but there wasn't other rivalry between the Redfern mob and the Newtown mob or anything?
Oh yeah,
but not outside of football?
No, but now I know what you're getting at. There'd be mobs going and fighting one another and yes, I remember all of that. But I wasn't involved in it. I mean, nobody around this way were in that regard.
Yeah, Beaconsfield seems a little, when you hear about the Redfern kids and you hear about the Newtown kids, and I think the Alexandria and Erskineville kids used to have a bit of a rumble with the Newtown ones, but you don't hear anything about Beaconsfield.
No, well, if you heard about the football team, which was a very old, established, I think when rugby league first came out, they had played, my grandfather told me that the Carringtons were playing rugby union then. So that was 1908.
And were there areas around here that were considered wilder? I mean, do you know what I mean? But were there areas that you looked down upon in terms of social status? You know, like were there other areas that you thought were more affluent? You know,
No, because in this area everybody was in the same boat. Whether it was in Beaconsfield, Redfern, Waterloo, Zetland, Rosebery. Maybe people in Rosebery had a few more, but it wouldn't be much. Mascot and all of that, they were all in the same boat.
Well, were any of the areas considered where the kids were wilder, you know?
Yeah, we were about the wildest. This Carrington Football Club was forever being told they'd have to get out of the competition and go and play somewhere else. But no, I got on extremely well. I've got friends, and I'm not saying this in a boastful manner, but I've got friends everywhere. When my two little daughters used to go with me to Mascot, shopping, everybody say, hello Mick, hello Mick, hello Mick. I said, Daddy, do you know everybody in Mascot? But it's people that you've known over the many, many years by playing football, playing cricket, boxing or whatever, and knowing them from that far back, you know. And of course, Dad being a Member of Parliament around here for 20 years, I would certainly have to know a few through him.
Was your dad, no, he was Mayor, was he a Member of Parliament as well?
He was the Member for Redfern, the State Member for Redfern for 20 years.
What was his name?
Fred Green.
Fred Green. Gosh, what years were they?
1949, 1950 to 1969 and 1970.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah, yes.
Yeah. That's a huge amount of time, isn't it?
Yes. And we're right?
Yeah. You just revealed to me that your dad was a state member of Parliament for Redfern for 20 years.
Yes.
So how old were you when he first got elected?
1950. I was born in 1926.
Oh, right.
24.
Right. So it took quite a long time to get around to going into state politics.
Yeah, well, what he would never stand, he would never oppose a sitting Labor member.
Oh, right.
Now that's not an excuse, that's a fact. And the sitting Labor member was William McKell, who later became the Governor-General of Australia. Then there was another man that beat my father in a pre-selection ballot, a man named Harry Noble. And he was a member for about 18 months after McKell went into the Governor-Generalship, and then he passed away. Then they had a pre-selection ballot with the usual ALP dogfight, and he won the pre-selection and won the seat.
And what motivated him? Was that still continuing on from the Depression and his desire to help people?
Yes, yes. In fact, when he was the member, he got the number of people in here grew bigger. There was more people coming in than there had been throughout the other years of my life with him, you know, through the ALP.
And what role did your mother have in all this?
I would say that he'd be the first to say to you, without Helen, he would never have taken any of it on. She was like a driving force to him.
And did she get involved politically? Like, I mean, presumably there would have been functions and he would have had a lot of... Did he ever get to be a minister or anything like that?
No, he was the whip, the government whip.
Right. So, did your mother actually ever use her contacts and what have you to assist people?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yes. Oh, yes. I remember my father, this high-rise at Redfern, the high-rise buildings at Redfern. I remember the first time the Housing Commission came into it. They were building Housing Commission homes. And he would not go, at that particular time, he would not go beyond a two-storey French, they call it the French maisonette, which was a two-storey block of units that encircled a square in the middle where grass was and clothes washing facilities and all that were. He didn't want to go beyond that. But eventually they forced him to, or the housing minister forced him to accept a four-storey, and that he wouldn't go any higher than that. So he didn't believe in the high rise. He believed that the way of life was as it should have been, and he was upset that the people of Redfern and Waterloo, in which these places were being built, were not going back into them.
Who were they moving into them?
Well, what they were doing were moving the people that were in there before they pulled the older homes down to build them. They were moving them into housing commissions, say out at Liverpool or somewhere like that, where the people did not want to go, but there was no way out of it. But he said that they should have the first right to go straight back there, but it never worked out. Some of them did and some of them got it. Some of them approached him and he made sure they got it. Because they were in the Housing Commission. You had to be in the Housing Commission to do anything. You had to be on the roll of the Housing Commission to get anywhere.
Was that the time of greatest change in this area? Was those flats coming in? If you were to look back in your life, what era or event or something precipitated at the time of great change where...
I think the end of the Second World War. The men that had served overseas were not going back to the Dole. They were never going back to living into letting the bosses get everything and then get nothing. The unions become stronger within itself. I worked at a place down here recently for 11 years as a union delegate, Austral Bronze, and much to my amazement they had no redundancy scheme. I found out a little later, that 5 years prior to me being employed there, that every man was sacked at Christmas and re-employed again after the holidays. That was shocking.
Well, that was up until recent times.
Yeah, yes. yes. No more than, that wasn't any more than 15 years ago. I've seen one man that worked there for 40 years finish up with $11,000 and he hadn't taken any sick leave. So I immediately brought in a redundancy scheme of some description, as long as it was in there.
That's changed working conditions and that's more recently, but
yeah.
What was the impact?
Well, to get back, I think it was the Second World War, that they weren't going back to that. They weren't going back to that cap in hand and that sort of nonsense. Jesus, they'd fought the toughest enemy in the world and defeated him everywhere they fought him. They weren't interested in what Austro-Bronze bosses thought. They knew what they had to have for this country. They loved the country. Australians do love their country. That was one of the reasons that I enlisted. I didn't want the Japanese running around down here.
So you didn't enlist when the fight was in Europe with the Germans?
Oh yeah, yes, that was there. That was on. That was well and truly on.
I know that was on, but what?
But so was the war with Japan.
Yeah.
And they were coming. They were down. They were in Port Rabaul and they were in New Guinea. How much closer could you get?
Yeah.
And according to Menzies, they were going to let them into the Brisbane line. Well, you know, what would a young boy at that 16, no, 17, what would he be thinking? A young eager kid that his mother and sisters and his father was here. And I mean, that's what enticed most of them. They say it was adventure that they went for. It wasn't adventure that won the Battle of Kokoda Trail. It was little kids of 18 years of age.
People took the war a lot more seriously once the Japanese became involved,
Well, it was there. It was on their doorstep.
Okay, let's go. Well, actually, before we diverged onto all that, somehow we're talking
about the unit.
And we're talking about friends and what you do with your friends. Well, one of the questions I wanted to ask was, how far did you roam? You know, how free were you to roam as a child?
Again, as I told you, I'd say to my mother, I'm going down to see Billy. And she'd say, well, your dinner will be ready at 5:30.
So it was just the immediate neighbourhood?
Yes, oh yes. Yeah.
Right. So you never went over to the airport or?
Oh, when this was raised with that fellow that I was telling you about that's older than I am, that's got that single home. He said, do you remember when we were kids, Mick? He said we'd run up under the top of Queen Street, Collins Street and Queen Street, and it was all sandhill. And you could look down and almost see what was the paddock of Mascot Airport. And somebody would yell out to the kids, look, there's a plane coming in. And we'd all run up and you could almost see it landing on this flat piece of earth out of Mascot. There was no factories, no big factories like this in between. And I suppose we've seen many of Kingsford Smith and Amy Johnson, although she was a bit earlier than I would remember. But I suppose there was all of those landing.
Did you never go over there?
Huh?
Did you ever just go
Well,
over?
it was too far to go. Like, I mean, you could have perhaps gone there in 10 minutes. But if say there was a family a couple of doors down and they'd say, well, we're going to Manly today, and can Mickey come? Mum would say, yeah, of course. But as a mob, because remember I was still young, when I got to 16 or something like that, of course, you're running around. But when you're a boy, no.
Did you have toys or books?
Yeah, I read a lot.
What were your favourite books or authors?
No adventure books of any description, you know. And we only had the radio. There was no TV.
Do you remember any radio programs?
I remember one night my father and I nearly died here. There used to be a chimney there because there was a fireplace here, right here. It's all torn out now, but there was a fireplace just there. And he was going to get a cosy in instead of the open fireplace. He got hold of some cosy from somewhere, I don't know.
What's a cosy?
It was a closed-in stove that had, I think it was a Pyrex face, and you loaded it with coke from the top. First of all, you loaded it with wood, and then when it got going, you loaded it with coke, and it got beautiful heat, very hot. And the chimney went up. There was an existing chimney, and it went up through there. Anyhow, prior to him putting it in, he had it all ready to put in, but he wanted to listen to the Test cricket with me in England. And we sat here by a little open 4-gallon kerosene tin full of coke. And we didn't wake up for 2 days.
What happened?
Carbon monoxide nearly killed the two of us.
Was it chimney, wasn't it?
There was no chimney, mate. And we sat up from 11 in the night till about 5 in the morning because Bradman had scored 300, and we listened to him score 300 odd runs or something. And my mother, she had to get the doctor and all, we just didn't wake up. We weren't sick, we just didn't wake up. And but that I think was a day and a half or 2 days.
It must have been a terrible fright.
Well, you didn't know anything about it. I went to bed all right. I thought I was all right. I was sitting on his knee. He was sitting there facing the fire, and the radio was on a shelf there. And I just went into bed and never thought about it. And I imagine he felt the same way. So he immediately got the cosy put in. Or he put it in himself. But that was the way it was. But there was entertainment of some description up all the time.
Can you remember any radio programs?
God, now I can't remember that far back. I can remember the cricket. That was, everybody listened to the cricket in England when it was on in there. But it was a late night. It was about 11 o'clock in the night. It started, or 10:30 in the night, and it went until 5 or 6 in the morning. But yes, Dad and Dave. I remember Dad and Dave very well. That was a session on the radio. And there was a couple of other ones, but there's one that just comes to mind that I can't think at this moment of other ones, but I'm sure to.
Were there any places you were not allowed to go as a child?
Yes, there was across the road behind the Rosebery Hotel was a big pool. It had been a brick pit, and its depth was unknown, and it was huge, and alongside of it was a place called Burroughs Wellcome, the chemical company. But this pool that I'm talking about was 150 yards, 250 yards across, but it was in a sort of it was a circular thing. And what had happened is, when they were down digging the bricks out, hundreds and hundreds of feet down, they struck a spring. And one man and his horse never got out.
Well, it just gushed through.
It gushed through, and by the time, it was so deep that by the time he got up to the top, he was down. And that was where I was, nobody was allowed to go there, but everybody did.
Were they swimming?
To swim, it was beautiful, clear water, crystal clear water. And Burroughs Wellcome was using it and throwing the chemicals back into it, which made it, but it made it better still. It cleared the water. They used to swim in there. All the Burroughs Wellcome's workers swam in there. And my mother forbade me to do that. But then I had an uncle, my mother's brother, and he was a big 6-footer and a young bloke. He died at 18 with peritonitis, but a very, very good swimmer. And he could get anything off my mother. She loved him. He said, "Nug, I'm going to take him over to teach him to swim." And she went on about it. So when we got over there, he just threw me in. And that was it. I learned to swim very quickly. Yeah. Then I had another, his brother lived straight across the road, and he was a SP bookmaker. And he used to take me 3 or 4 times a week swimming out to Coogee. He had a car, and we'd go out to Coogee before I went to school for an hour or so every morning. But I had it was marvellous what there was to do. It wasn't as if you're sitting at home that there was nothing to do. It was that there was too much to do. But now you're saying to me, what was it? Well, I just can't answer in that regard. Of course we listened to the radio, but there wasn't much chance to listen to the radio when there was all the people coming in and out.
Yes, yes. Okay, so you weren't allowed, your mum wouldn't let you go
swimming to
that place, but even after you learned to swim, were you allowed to go?
No, she still didn't like it. She didn't like it.
Was there anywhere else that you weren't allowed to go?
Not that I can think of.
Were there people that you had to avoid?
No.
Okay. you've mentioned, what's your schools that you went to? Where did you go?
Waterloo School.
And what was that like there?
The kids were very, very good. Teachers were good. But again, poverty.
Mm. Can you remember much about your school days?
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Well, what can you remember?
Well, in what way?
I don't know, what comes to your mind? When you think back of you being at school, back there, what image jumps into your mind?
Sports.
What did you play?
Football.
Yeah.
Swimming. We went swimming once a week.
Where?
Brighton. From Waterloo to Brighton.
Mm.
That was a school subject. An afternoon given to that. And we'd leave about 11 o'clock in a tram, all of us, in that particular class or whatever, and go swimming with the teacher. And I remember his name, McPherson. Later on, when I left there and went to Gardeners Road, which was renowned for its sports, Gardeners Road. The same thing. Football, cricket, handball.
What was the discipline used?
It was caned. The cane, if you played it.
Were you encouraged to go on academically, or was it assumed that kids in that area would end up working, end up being workers?
Oh no. The teachers took an interest in you getting on, in staying at school, particularly at Gardeners Road. To go on further and become something. I had a teacher that was a maths teacher in what, I don't know what they call it now, but was in first year of the senior, after primary school. It was the first year after that. His name was Ken Brokenshire. And his aim was that if you weren't listening, he broke the chalk in half and threw it at you. And he'd hurt. It hit you. And some years later at a place called Bradfield Park over at Chatswood, I'm in the Air Force and he's a flying officer observer. He said, Mickey Green, they're going to catch up with you one day. So he knew, but I mean, they were interested in even he was interested in just how far I got, how far was I going, what I was going to do, etc. That was why I come to my mind. Yes, they were very interested, the teachers, in all the children getting on. The headmaster, no, I shouldn't say that, the headmaster of the secondary school was a man called Rupert Brown, and he was very good for each child. Like, he wanted to see everybody get on. And his punishment was this: if he caught you smoking, which he did me one day, I was over examining a football ground to see if we could play on it that day or whether it was too wet, and somebody told him that I was smoking over there. So, and this was his treatment. There's two alternatives, Mick. I'll send a letter home to your mother by somebody else, not by you. He said, or you sit here and smoke that pipe.
How long did you have to smoke it for?
Well, he said, just see how you go with it. You want to smoke? Try it. So I did. I was as sick as a dog afterwards, but so I stopped smoking then. I've taken it up since.
I wanted to ask, and so were you happy at school?
Oh yeah.
I want to ask about sex education. Did you get any?
No.
From anybody?
Well, my father said to me, I was about 16, he said to me, my mother's asked me to have a talk to you. I said, what about it? He said, girls and sex. He said, but I've told her you know more about than I do, so it's a waste of time. He said, do you? I said, enough, Fred, enough. Yeah, but that was, no, you'd get it from the people that you were knocking, the peers, the boys that were knocking about with you. Sometimes from the girls, they'd educate you. But that was, no, I mean, there was never, not that it was frowned upon, but it was the father's job to tell the boy and the mother's job to tell the girl, I imagine. And that was his advice to me. I told her that you could tell me about it. So.
When you're talking about the area, what sort of ethnic mix? I haven't heard anything except Anglo-Saxon kind of names?
Well, that was pretty well, that's what it was as far as I can remember, or if it wasn't, we took no notice of it. And I don't mean that we took no notice in a racist type of way. For instance, there was one boy that I went to school with, and he was only young, and he'd come from Germany. And he went to school, this was before the war, well before the war, 1936, 35, something like that. He went to school in a German sailor suit. So you can imagine his reception with the kids at the school.
But that wouldn't have had anything to do with him being German, it would have been the sailor suit.
Well, no, because the kids were reading what was on the sailor suit, like what was around the little rim of the something Koenig or something like that. And I said to him, his name was Godfrey. I said to him, Godfrey, get out of the suit, for God's sake.
Yeah.
So he did. But they'd come out here, they were refugees from Hitler, there was no doubt in the world about that. And his father was a glass blower, and he'd received an offer of a job with the ACI over here. Schmidt, who was a German himself originally, who owned ACI.
Do you think Godfrey might have been Jewish?
No, he was white, blonde, and I know there are a lot of Jewish blondes, but I believe that the father could see what was coming. And there was an elder brother and an elder sister than Godfrey. So
I wonder what happened to them during the war. I wonder if they were...
Well, no, they came here. They were here during the war.
The Australian authorities interned everybody who weren't...
Well, these people weren't interned because Godfrey, right through the war, he still lived down there.
Oh, good. No, there's some awful stories about what happened.
Dear, I know. I had a very good friend, and we're still on there, aren't we?
Yeah.
And his father was an importer of wine and a producer of wine in Australia, one of the biggest in Australia, and he was interned. And that man, it was his father, that man never got over that.
What was the name? Oh, sorry, okay.
Well, no, it's Fiorelli.
Oh, nice.
Vic Fiorelli.
Gee.
Yet that man was more Australian than I. But I don't know about his father.
Mm.
His name was Mick Fiorelli, but Vic was the son. And Vic, I believe, still holds the record in the South Sydney area for getting the most wickets as a slow bowler.
Yeah.
Vic was more Australian than I am, but his father was interned, you know.
Yeah. You haven't mentioned were there any Asian families around, Chinese families?
Oh, yeah, but Chinese, not as families. Out at Mascot and Botany there was Chinese gardens. And every morning you could almost set your clock to it. You'd hear the clip, clop of the horse and cart going into the markets.
Up what, Botany Road?
Botany Road. And then they'd come back. And the horse used to drive itself. The bloke would be asleep, but the poor Chinaman, he'd worked all day and all night. He's asleep, but the horse knew where to go.
But they never had kids, they were just...
Never seen them, never seen them. But I didn't see many Chinese. I suppose at the school there'd be a couple of them, but racism never played any part.
What about Aboriginal families? Were there any around then?
Well, now some of the people that I drink with and are very close friends are Aboriginal people. One Sol Bolair, that's you often see him on the TV with that ATSIC thing. Have you ever seen Sol?
No.
Right, well, and you know, there's a lot of them that I see and know very well.
But were there any in the neighbourhood when you were growing up?
No.
Well, how would you describe the neighbourhood? Was it a residential, industrial, or mixed?
Industrial. Fred, my father, fought to make it residential. But the best Askin could give him was that you'd have to split it, Fred, industry and residence. He said, I've got a side to look after too. He said, my blokes have got businesses in the area.
But obviously you were living here, so there must have been some...
It was always the mix. But the big industries have gone. I mean,
what were the big industries here before?
Bradford, Kendall, Austral, Bronze, there's just a name too, that were big, that employed over 1,000 men, you know. I mean, I think Bradford Kendall's, again, this is only to give an indication of their size, was the first country in the world to build a solid tank, cast a tank that there was no rivets in it that could kill a man. when the tank was hit by a shell, the rivets used to fly out and kill the men inside it. And Bradford Kendall's built the first tank that was made in one piece.
Gee.
That was a huge industry, big industry. So was Bradford. There was plenty of them around. But we always lived around it. They never, I think that there's more little industry infringing into this residential area now than there ever was in those times. Perhaps I'm wrong, you know.
And where did most people work? I suppose when you were a kid, most people
Well,
weren't
they
working.
weren't working.
Yeah.
But
Did those big factories shut down in the Depression?
No, as I say, you'd go to Bradford Kendall's and there'd be 50 or 500 men or something, and they'd want 1 or 5.
Was there any sense of those big companies looking after the locals? Like, I mean, they're in this area.
Well, a great deal of the locals work for them.
Right.
Great deal, but when the Depression came, they were put off. And I suppose they were in the queue looking for the day's work themselves.
And what's the relationship been between the residents, the people living here, and the industries?
Well, it depends on the industry. I mean, itself, you know. I mean, many people used to complain to my father about the smoke coming out of such and such a chimney, and it was wrong. And then the government would make them put a muffler of some description on it or to stop it. But he always complained about this thing up here, this incinerator.
The Waterloo.
Yeah, he was never the member then. He was retired then, but he's
Was there much pollution around? Can you remember in the 30s?
No, it was a lot. There was nothing. The cars weren't on the road.
But people had fuel fires and stuff.
Yes, but I mean the air was always cleaner and better. They'd have a fuel fire, but I mean it wouldn't. That compared to a car, I don't even. Well, I was driving behind a semi-trailer the other day. My God, it was like driving behind a smoke screen. You know.
Well, I was going to ask about the social focus of the area, but you've already talked about the ALP. I mean, would you say that the ALP and their functions and this house and that, was that the social focus, or was there another focus?
This house, for my family, the ALP in general, yes. For instance, one of the fellows that started the ALP with my dad was Tom O'Connor. He had about 9 or 10 kids, and he lived down the other end of Queen Street. He'd have plenty of social life if he wanted down there with them. You know, I mean, that the people in that area would go to Tom O'Connor for things that they wanted done in the area.
Was there any kind of pub or place like that where people would
Yes, there's the Rosebery Hotel there. I drank there for many, many years. There was another one across the road, the Empress of India, that was almost opposite the Rosebery Hotel. But the Rosebery Hotel was a little old weatherboard place with a horse trough outside it. It has certainly changed now, isn't it? Well, it's a big modern. I think it was the new pub was built about 1939. It's a modern triple story or double story place. The Empress of India went.
Was it a safe neighbourhood?
Yes.
Where would people meet to talk informally? Where would the women meet if they wanted to have a...
Go to one another's homes, go to the church. The church was used not only as a church. The church was used... Now, my mother and her friends had often put plays on up there. They'd been plays and things like that.
Was that just a church drama group, was it? Or?
No, it was for anybody that wanted to go up there. But you didn't go up there and... Yes, they did. They put it on for publication. But they'd enjoy doing it there. We're practising and doing that, you know. And
women would do that?
Oh, yeah.
What else would they do?
Well, they'd knit, they'd sew, have jumble sales and all of that sort of thing.
And what was the binding thing that operated amongst the women?
I couldn't tell you that. I think that...
It wasn't the church, not the ALP.
No, it wasn't the church, and it wasn't... A lot of women were in the ALP, but that dance was for anybody. That was an ALP dance, but it was a free dance, and that was for anybody who wanted to go to a dance. But to get back to what you're asking, I don't know what the binding thing was.
In those days, was the neighbourhood pretty stable in terms of who lived here? You know, was it I was thinking, if you knew everybody and the same people were living here year after year after year, you know, You don't need
Did
a club.
it become boring?
No, you wouldn't need it.
Well, you didn't.
No, you'd be able to say, hey, so-and-so, let's put on a play.
Oh, yeah, yes. And not only that, say, for instance, on a Friday night, somebody would say it's Jimmy Smith's birthday. There's a party on. You know, everybody would go over to Jimmy Smith's birthday party with their own beer or drink and with their own sandwiches, etc. They made sure they didn't impose on Jimmy Smith's mother and father.
So are you saying that it was a stable population here then?
I would say yes. Yes.
Can you remember much movement and many strangers moving?
No, I used to often hear about that somebody in Redfern had to do a midnight flit. He had to get out, he owed so much rent. I know we owed rent for a while. And I think he had to do something, and I don't know what he sold. He may have even sold a horse to pay that back rent. My father.
You had a horse?
He had a horse, and if you remember what I told you, he was a brick carrier.
Oh, that's right, yeah.
But whatever, he repaid that rent.
Were most people renting, or did they own their place
Oh
then?
no, very few owned it, very few.
When did your parents buy this place? Did your parents buy this place?
Towards the end of the war, I believe. And they paid a deposit on a block of land further up Victoria Street, on this same side but across Collins Street. The intention was to build a new home there. By this time, he had improved his position. Mum certainly wasn't working. What he was doing, I don't know. But he was in a position where he was paying this thing off. Then he bought a little pony for his grandson, my elder sister's son. She had a daughter first and then a son. And at 6 years of age, the son was killed crossing Botany Road by a bus.
On the horse?
No. Delivering a message for somebody. Got a message for somebody. Nearly broke all our hearts. He was a lovely kid. So that ended that. The horse went, the place went. The next thing, when he became a Member of Parliament, he said, Mick, will you do something for me? I said, if I can, Fred. He said, will you take your mother to Bundeena and find a block of land near the water? It's what she wants. So I did. And they started to build on that. This was when he was a Member of Parliament, wasn't it? They started to build on that. Then the builder died. And I finished the place off. My friends and I, we finished it up, but most of it off, So that was what happened in regard to that. Now, what we asked me about,
I can't remember.
the people.
Just the stability of the neighbourhood, and if people were mostly renting or.
Oh, they were all renting. There'd be very few who owned their own home. Very few.
Well, didn't people get evicted if they couldn't pay the rent in the Depression?
Sure, and somehow or other, there wasn't a movement of people running out and not paying rents, owing large amounts of rents and not paying it. Whether the landlords were reasonable or thought that, well, in my father's case, I know that he held that rent back for months because he knew the position that they were in. But I mean, he was a businessman, and you don't run a business that way. So all I can tell you, I don't know how the rest of the people did, but most of them are gone now.
Where have they all gone to?
God knows. When you ask me that, I know some have gone up the Central Coast, some have gone into Queensland, some have gone out Liverpool way and all of that, But how they went there or why, I don't know.
It must be sad seeing everybody move from the neighbourhood.
Well, it's sad to see new faces. Can I say that? It's sad to see the old faces go, but the new faces, because again, Teddy McDermott's trying to do something of a similar thing that the ALP was doing then. There's still the ALP still exists. His son is the president of that branch. Now, they've formed a neighbourhood watch, which works in this way, in this area. And he tries to get people involved in that by having parties up at the parks and jazz concerts and all of that type of thing. So, if that answers what you're...
Yeah. People are rebuilding it here anyway.
People are coming into the neighbourhood and he's welcoming them.
Yeah. Well, thinking back to the 30s, what smells can you remember?
Well, I suppose the first one I think of was the boiling downs in O'Riordan Street.
Boiling down works?
Yeah, where the old horses were they kill the horse, then skin him and boil him down to become glue or something. I don't know what they did with him. But that was on for many years, but it didn't blow this way much.
That would have been a pretty awful smell, wouldn't it?
Shocking. Ask the Queen.
Why?
She screamed about it. They only took her through O'Riordan Street once. The next time they took her another way.
Tell me that story.
Well, I understand that at the time that they picked her up at Mascot Airport and come along O'Riordan Street, and of course the boiling's down going full pelt or something. But
when was that in the 50s?
Yeah, it would have been the first time she was ever here. But then the next time she came, I don't know this for a fact, only that they did say that she was upset and they were upset about the odour. But it used to not blow this way. For some reason or other, and it was along O'Riordan Street here, a fair way down, before you got to Gardeners Road, but very close to Gardeners Road. But if you was on O'Riordan Street, you'd certainly get it. If you was down the end of Beaconsfield Street, you could smell it.
When did that go?
Well, I would say in the early 50s. Again, I could be wrong, and still they're in a form of not the boiling down part, but the bones. They collect all the meat bones and that. They go there and do that. They make casein glue or something out of the thing.
And so that's still functioning?
Well, as far as I know, something's functioning down there in the...
Can you remember any other smells?
No.
Sounds. What sounds? If you think back to your childhood, 1930s here, what do you hear?
Well, it was a lot quieter. The thing that I can remember, as I told you, the Chinese, the horse and carts going along Botany Road in the early hours of the morning. Clip, clop, clip, clop. I used to sleep there. There was a lounge, pull-out lounge, come bed type of thing. And you'd hear that. But they weren't foreign sounds. They weren't a sound that you couldn't live with.
Or identify.
Or identify immediately. You'd know what it was.
One thing I want to ask you, can you remember any rituals like, we've got Christmas and Easter, but people used to celebrate, and there's Cracker Night, I suppose, but people used to celebrate, was Cracker Night on Empire Day or something?
Yes, it was Guy Fawkes' night, but it was, I think they held it on Empire Day. I don't know whether I know Empire Day was the Cracker Night, so whether they held it on Empire Day on Guy Fawkes' birthday or whatever, or the other way around, I don't know.
Can you remember any other rituals like flag raising and waving and that kind of thing?
Yes, I remember going with my parents, again because they were mayor or alderman on the South Sydney Council, to the 150th commemorate when Australia was 150 years old. I remember that. That was in 1938, I think. And everybody was invited on these ferries, and we went all over the harbour celebrating, and they were just like the 200th year one. I remember that. That was 50 years before the 200th one.
Do you remember any other regular sorts of things like Arbor Day or, I don't know really.
Well, I used to go because a couple of my friends were in it with the 18-footer racing on the harbour, the sailboats on the harbour, the 18-footers. I crewed one a couple of times, but most times I was on the ferry watching them race,
That would have been when you were older.
Oh yes,
yeah. Okay, from your childhood, can you remember any big events? I suppose you've mentioned that 150 year thing. Any other big events that you can stand out in your mind?
No, I can't think so.
Okay. What about local characters?
There's plenty of them. Again, because it's a political family, I imagine. There was during the Depression, and I can just vaguely remember it, but Bob Efron was here one night, and he said to me, he said, "How far can you go back, Mick?" I said, "I don't know." He said, "Do you remember the White Rat?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Gee, that's going back a long way." And the White Rat was, he wasn't really, he was unbalanced. But where a politician would stand on the street corner, and this is what used to happen, they'd stand on the street corner and everybody would gather around them and they'd make the speech. Instead of door knocking and they did all that too, but I mean, that was where they made their spiel as to what they would do. And this fellow, I don't know who he represented. Certainly wasn't the Labor Party, it wasn't the Liberal Party, but he carried his own soapbox with him. In the tram, no matter what. And he'd stand up and he'd talk complete rubbish. And he was an albino. And that's why they called him the White Rat. But when Bob Efron mentioned that, and that's going back a long time since Efron mentioned it, but it stuck in my mind because I think he thought it may have. If he mentioned that, and I do remember it, yes.
Can you remember any other characters?
Oh God, yeah. No, offhand, I do.
Okay.
I'd be guessing.
Okay. Where did most people shop?
Locally.
Where's that?
Well, there was a shop on that corner, at the corner of Victoria Street and Collins Street. There was a shop halfway down Victoria Street on the other side of the road.
So little corner shops they'd shop at, not big super.
Yeah, it wasn't supermarkets or things like that.
And did people shop on a daily basis, did they? Rather than like...
I think they shop and had some money. I don't think it was a matter of on a daily or a weekly or we're going shopping. It just wasn't allowed. I remember, well, for instance, they used to, my sister Blanche said, don't forget to mention this, there was a man sold rabbits, and at other times he sold clothes props. And I said, no, I won't forget to mention that one. And so that was they would, I think they would buy when they had money. They couldn't buy it any other time.
Well, what major appliances did you have? I mean, how did you keep food fresh?
Appliances? There's no appliances. You had an ice chest.
And where'd you get the ice from?
The iceman would come round, and if you didn't have the money for the ice, you didn't use the ice chest.
So that was sort of a bit of a luxury.
Yes, yes.
Can you remember any jokes or tricks that kids would play?
Oh, on cracker night they'd blow everybody's, what's the name up, the letterboxes. That'd happen. They'd knock on doors and then run round the corner or something and disturb them. Anything to disturb somebody, you know. But on the average, the kids were good. You know, and I'm saying that because I was one of them, I suppose, but you don't see the stupidity that goes on today.
Can you remember any songs from that time?
Oh. Yes, I can. There's one I'm trying to think, I can't think, and one of these ALP members, he was a very old man, and he used to sing it regularly at the functions that they used to have. And it was the leader of the Blackville band, arose last Labor Day or something. Every nation has a flag, bar the coon. That was the name of the song, I think, or that's how it finished. It was just trying to show equality, that it was not applied.
Can you remember the words? Can you go through it?
The leader of the Blackville band arose last Labor Day, and he said to us whilst we were on parade, I really feel so much ashamed, I wish I could turn white. For the white men they march with their banners gay. There on the stand is a German band, and they to something they played. A Scots brigade, each man arrayed in his two-tone kilt, he marched to Auld Lang Syne. Now the Irish and the Dutch, they can't guide us so much. I forget that bit. But it finishes up. England waves, Ireland waves the harp and shamrock, England waves a lion bold, even China has a dragon, and Germany an eagle gold. Bonnie Scotland has a thistle, Turkey has a crescent moon. Now how this comes in, I don't know. But what would the Yankees do for the old red, white and blue? Every nation has a flag, bar the coon. Now that's one that I can think of, and there's hundreds and hundreds of others like that, you know.
Really?
Yeah, but a terrible lot of Irish songs for some.
What can you remember of common sort of illnesses? Can you remember what was a common illness?
Yeah, well, the flu was always bad. Yeah, I mean, somebody'd always be down in the family with the flu in the winter or something like that. There was scarlet fever. Well, the boy that was my uncle that I told you about that died at 18.
Peritonitis.
Peritonitis. Yeah.
Well, can you remember any other deaths?
I remember people dying of you leave a wound under gangrene. That wasn't uncommon in those days. You were very frightened to go to South Sydney Hospital. If you went to South Sydney, this is what the story was. As kids, you went to South Sydney Hospital with a broken leg, they'd chop your leg off. But often, although I really shouldn't say that because it finished up a wonderful hospital, but often boys that would get their legs broken playing football, they'd never seem to set it right. And they'd always have that sort of limp. Which today is that uncle of mine, penicillin would have cured him in 2 minutes. They didn't have penicillin.
What were the most popular newspapers?
I think, well, Sydney Morning Herald was always there.
Was that just in your household or in...
No, I don't mean here. I mean it was always here in Sydney.
Oh, yes.
But it was never in here. I don't think you bought it maybe. You didn't. Later on you'd buy the Mirror or whatever was going on. At one stage the ALP barred the Telegraph. They told the members not to buy the Telegraph. And that went on for a number of years. It was something Frank Packer had done or with Menzies or something. And the ALP felt they'd been wrong by it, or the leaders of the ALP felt they'd been wrong by it or something. So, and they didn't buy it, and that was that.
And what about, were there magazines or comics in the house?
Oh, yes.
What ones?
Yes, there was a shop around here on Botany Road, you'd always go and change your comics. You changed them. I can't think of who they were, Popeye and all of that, Ginger Megs, all of those. But as to who they, any more than that, I'd be flat out to remember.
Okay. Can you remember any local criminals? You know.
I prefer not to answer that.
What about things like 2 Up and there's the SP booking and foreign orders and... Yeah,
all that went on. There was a 2 Up game in a back lane up the street up here on a Saturday or a Sunday. There was SP bookmakers, 3 or 4 in the one street, a couple in every pub. There was card games that they'd play for money. That was a big interest in the various houses. That a group of women would get together of a night and play cards.
Gamble?
Not for money, they didn't have no money, but they played their cards.
But was there, you know, if you had these sorts of activities, the 2 Up and the booking and all that, but was that actually considered by the locals as criminal activity?
No.
Yeah.
No. It was a law, but it was never up to recently, it was never carried, it wasn't imposed on people, that people didn't worry about.
Well, I've heard a lot of stories about police raiding SP bookies and having to pay them off and all that kind of thing.
You would hear of that, yes, but what I would say that what the police was after was the certainty of getting the money once a week.
What were the police like at that time, in the 30s?
Well, they were tougher, if I might say that. They were tougher within themselves. Like, if they could, I don't mean that they were hardened or anything, but maybe they were a bit hardened, but they see it at 6 or 7 of you playing together, and they'd say, haven't you got to go home to go to Mick? Now get home.
Even in this street out here, your own street?
Yeah, or wherever they thought that you were making up to some mischief, not necessarily doing anything. They thought that you may be going to do something, and that sort of thing.
That seems a bit high-handed.
Yeah, or often, as they got to know Dad, isn't it? You want me to take you home to your father?
That'd be enough, wouldn't it?
Yes, of course, yes. As a matter of fact, I was arrested on one occasion for fighting in the street. I was in an Air Force uniform and I had a fight with 2 Yank sailors that wanted to take over the cab that I just got into. And the 3 of us were arrested, charged with offensive behaviour, and for me to get my bail I had to ring somebody else. I didn't ring you.
Oh gee, did you ever go on holidays?
Yeah, when I say yes, a couple of times. A couple of times. My mother had a ridiculous place to go on a holiday in the summer. Lidcombe. My mother had a friend that lived at Lidcombe and went up there once or twice. But out of the area, no. But when my second eldest sister was young, my mother took her a couple of times to friends up at Tamworth or somewhere around there. But no.
What did you know of the outside world outside your local area as a child? So we're talking the 30s.
Well, are we talking about the world or are we talking about Australia? Or?
Oh, both. You know, how aware were you?
Oh, very aware. I mean, there's lessons at school alone, history and geography. The geography particularly would show you what was happening in the world, because at Gardeners Road they did a little bit more than just say this is an island and so lives there. They, particularly when the war was on the way to starting. No, it hadn't started, but they'd say this is Germany. The Chancellor of Germany is Adolf Hitler, and he's doing this, that and the other. And they always pointed out Japan and warned you of the danger that may come.
Was there a lot of yellow peril stuff?
Yes, towards the Japanese, not towards the Chinese. It wasn't Chinese. In the way I picked it up, anyway, it was never anything but the yellow peril was Japan, because they'd attacked Manchuria and places like that. They were the ones that were doing the invading. And it's funny, Australians don't seem to like anybody invading. It seems then that they are the aggressor, whether they are or not.
And you didn't want to talk any more about the criminals, did you?
No.
Okay.
No.
Right, is there anything else you want to say?
No, I don't think so.
Okay, thanks very much. It's been very interesting.
Good, sir.